Welcome to the Artist Dojo, where I will be speaking with artists, craftspeople, and creatives of all disciplines in order to see how they navigate a life in the arts. Today's guest is Charles Goforth, director, actor, producer, teacher extraordinaire, in my opinion, in New York City. I'm a little biased because I've worked with you in the past. His credits are numerous, so I'll try to keep it abbreviated, but I will offer a link where you can see the full list of his accomplishments. He's been a member of the Labyrinth Theater Company since 1995 under their illustrious banner. He's been a part of numerous productions, workshops, acting, directing, you name it, he's done it. Again, amazing teacher under the lineage of Maggie Flanagan and William Esper, Sanford Meisner. So since we are in the Artist Dojo, let's talk a little bit about that lineage. Charles is the producer of The Lovely Dark, a fiction podcast about how darkness in our lives may reveal a path to love and light. Each of the episodes are short audio plays written by an award-winning writer and performed by a cast of remarkable actors, including Oscar winners, members of the New York City's Labyrinth Theater Company. Each episode is produced with a full cast, a beautiful, immersive soundscape, and original score. In my opinion, he is absolutely one of the best acting teachers there is, and he may very well have the coolest last name in show business. Charles Goforth, welcome to the Arts Dojo.
That was really lovely. Thank you, friend. Thank you. It's good to be with you.
Yeah.
That was
Um,
great. Thank you.
so I think we first met in 2008. My very close friend, brother from another mother, James Favell, was always kind of out of the group of friends, very much had a finger on the pulse of theater and what was what. I felt like I was just in the clouds. I didn't know anything. He was like, man, the Labyrinth Theater Company is where it's at. They're doing a master class. So I was like, all right, he did it. I said, let me apply and go to the next round of classes. And that's where I met you, among many other uh, amazing members and teachers. And you provided me with this epiphany that I'll never forget. I'm doing a scene, and at the time, still my kind of craft on and the work wasn't fully there. Like good things would happen by accident, but it wasn't a matter of like crafting it or working on it really in that in a way that I could sustain. And so I'm in the middle of this scene, and I did something, and you're like, you don't know that yet. You said to me like, you don't know that, and then I'm like, what? I was kind of confused. And you're like, you don't know that yet. Like you don't know this part of the information yet. You haven't like actually received it. Like as an actor, yes, you've read it, but like at this point, there's no way you could know this. And that hit me like a ton of bricks. It was like I remember being on the train going back home, like, I don't know anything. I don't know. Like it was just this like, existential acting crisis. But it
What do
was
I know?
yeah, what do I know? I don't know anything. I
I don't know
I
anything,
don't
right?
I don't know
Right.
anything. So anyway, um that was one of those moments, but there were many along the way, and you had an intensity to your teaching that was something for me personally I needed. Like that worked for me very well, and you're very good about that, without getting too deep into the weeds of that, but you're adaptable to different people's styles. And I think for me, you were one of the first people that was able to just like kind of crack the whip in a way that's like, hey, do you really want to do this in a way that is real, or do you want to do the shtick, or you want to do the real deal? And so I'm grateful and appreciative of that from now until forever. Anything good I do, I'll give you compliments for. Anything bad I do, I'll say it was my old bad habits.
Well, I appreciate that, but I
Yeah.
think as much as I've seen, recently your progress and your commitment, um, you know, I'm glad to have helped create a foundation for you.
Thank you.
But you're in the clouds at this point, so I'm like waiting up. Hey, man! But I thank you for that, and it's nice to know that there was a lasting and helpful,
Yeah, I think you did that for
lesson.
many people. Um, just in case you don't know, I think sometimes teachers get uh, lost in the ether of being remembered and thanked for their efforts, because really it's like, and that's the whole point of this artist dojo podcast, is kind of my hope in maybe passing the baton a little bit to, if these podcasts existed when I was in my late teens, early 20s, I think I would have benefited from these types of conversations. So, anyway, what are you up to? What's new?
Well, I'm glad that you mentioned the Lovely Dark podcast. It's been the most recent project that I've been working on. And we were just invited by a media company here in New York City called Blackstone Publishing. They listened to some episodes and they wanted to make a deal to publish the first season as an audio book. And
Congratulations.
so, thank you. So now, in addition to the podcast, we have the Lovely Dark season one. Um, season That's the odd name of the audiobook, the Lovely Dark season one, and it's available on Audible. And I'm very proud of it because it not only gives us a chance to collect the 12 episodes that originally aired as part of the podcast, but we did some bonus material. There are interviews as well inside the audiobook, but it really has been a pleasure to feel the concrete landing of the effort, the 3 years of work, 2.5, 3 years of work that culminated in the 12 episodes, currently working on the first episode of season one. But so the audio book and the publishing of that and all of the work and the mastering and mixing and creating of the bonus material has been my most recent project that I'm proud to say was published just weeks ago. So I'm very happy about that. I'm raising money for a short film written by Sarah Wharton, who I met when I did a workshop at the Private Theater, which is a theater company that also includes a guy named John Gould Rubin, who is a member of Labyrinth. And that's how I met Sarah. So I'm working on raising money for that short film. I'm so proud of the screenplay. She has spent a couple years working on it, and we've been getting a delicious response to the screenplay, and we're hoping that will
Great.
that will convert into something other than 15 pages. We're hoping that
Yeah.
we can raise money. So I'm working on the crowdfunding video for that short film. And I was really happy to be able to be involved in Labyrinth's most recent summer intensive in Long Island City. We just did it a few weeks ago, and I got
I'm
to
so
read
happy
and
that those are
direct.
still
Yeah,
continuing. They're
me too.
priceless.
I got to read and direct and be there, um, and it was special, very special for me to be able to continue to do that. It always is, but as I get older, I always realize how grateful I am to be able to pop in and be asked to read and direct projects, year after year. And I think about how long it's been. You said that, you mentioned that I've been a member since '95, and I'm awestruck, I'm bewildered by the amount of time that has gone by. So Labyrinth, my short film, the podcast, the audiobook, are the things that are immediately on the table, and I'm proud of that work. And now, actually, I think germane to the subject of your podcast, still currently climbing, struggling to find the next source of revenue, the next project, the next effort.
Yeah. I
So
I
yeah,
think, sorry to cut you off. The dog next door wanted to join the podcast as well. Um,
he's welcome.
yeah. Uh, the Lovely Dark is really beautifully produced. Honestly, when you mentioned that it's on Audible, or it's going to be, I really look forward to that, because it's right up there with any other. Like, I really enjoy podcasts. I enjoy kind of the new resurgence of this radio play type uh, producing that's happening with stories, and it's up there. So it's a really refined piece of podcasting, theater, radio play. So for anyone out there, yes,
Thanks,
I have
man.
listened to it, and you will enjoy it too. So you should definitely listen.
Thank you,
Um,
thank you. I really have enjoyed. It's been a real learning process. 3 years ago, I knew nothing about how to create a podcast, and I was fortunate enough to assemble a team uh, of sound designers, mixers, my composer Andre Fratto, and the sound mixer Tyler Whitlatch, Nick Long, Emmett Seglia, and have been learning how to produce without having to be the only person involved in creating the process, right?
the one
Um,
man show is a challenge for sure. Yeah.
yeah. And these guys have taught me so much about the production level. So it's nice of you to mention that, and I do appreciate that. That means a lot. It's one of the things I'm proudest about. And I did. It is available on Audible right now, actually.
I will be getting it
For
today,
been a few.
100%.
It's been a couple of weeks. It's been a few weeks, and I was listening, and I was enjoying. It's very affirming to hear what you said, because I was listening to the quality of what we've made, and I really do feel we did our best. We did our absolute best to make them as well as we could, and I'm really proud of them, and the actors too. I just
Oh yeah.
realized I was putting together a press release. There's 35 actors involved, 8 writers, 35 actors,
Wow.
and a whole like 2 dozen, production assistants, consultants. Sean Randall, who is a member of Labyrinth Theater Company and an old friend of mine from a production we did back in the '90s, is helping me with inclusivity as we move into season two. Because as a white middle-aged guy, my immediate circle of friends that I had grown up with as a director and playwright, a lot of them were white. So I'm trying to make sure that I take responsibility for that part. And Sean has been really great about that. But he's one of several of the consultants and all the people that help us put together that project. So thanks for giving me a chance to brag
Yeah.
a little bit, because it really does mean a lot.
Well, it's commendable that you're thinking in that direction for season two. I honestly think in season one, you did a great job of having diverse storytellers and elements. And it was evident from the first episode that it was really good quality, and it only progressively developed and got better. So that's my two
Thank you,
cents.
brother.
Everyone should
Thank you.
definitely listen to it and get a feel for it yourself, because the quality of the stories and the storytelling and the production of it are top notch. Um,
Thank you. Thank
okay,
you.
so I'm going to get into some of the questions just to not take up too much of your time, but I definitely want to pick your brain. Um, in the past, artists were an integral part of society and culture, from storytellers to griots to tribal elders to iconoclasts, etc. Do you think that the artist is still an integral part of today's society?
My personal relationship to that question is to be reminded that lately I've been feeling like that we're rebels, that more and more we're outside of the matrix, the tacit assumptions that are made in the subconscious of our culture about how to be, what's right, what's valuable, where does status come from, and the din of media and politics, and everybody spending a questionable amount of time with their face in a small screen. I've actually begun to feel grateful about the role of being an artist, because it makes me feel as if I'm in a profession that will not take for granted the things that have become oddly normal. And in my personal life, there's a parallel, because I have been feeling like I'm in the midst of probably what is a radical transformation. Um, so I do believe that artists are an integral part of what makes humanity uh, do well, thrive, evolve, and and progress. I don't know that I would use the word integral at the moment because I'm a little bit confused about it, to be quite
Hmm.
honest with you. I think
Well,
I'm not
I use
sure.
that word specifically because in my mind, in the past, there were these like rites of passage or elders telling stories or um, almost adventures that you'd have to go on in your own life that you would bring back and tell. And that feels like it would be integral, that it would be like woven into the fabric of what we are. So I get what you're saying. It makes total sense. It's like today, is it maybe has it taken a step back? I don't know. It's interesting. I totally I get where you're coming from with it.
Yeah, I think about Joseph Campbell, and how, when Bill Moyers was talking to Joseph Campbell about mythology and how ritual and mythology in the development of a young person in smaller culture, in smaller villages or tribes, the mythology and the ritual of storytelling and where how you fit was woven deeply into the development of the young person, into the coming of age ritual, the marriage ritual. There was a fabric, and the thread of storytelling was essential to that. And mythology, of course, is sort of a cultural recipe made up of those kinds of very very fundamental storylines about who we are and what we're doing here. You know, and Joseph Campbell and Bill Moyers were talking about, well, what about now? Do we have a mythology now? Is there, and Bill Moyers was saying, well, the mythology, and for Moyers, that includes religion, right? The mythology of we are the center of the universe, or God watches football, you know, these things don't work anymore. And so Bill Moyers was saying, what's the mythology now? What is it? And Bill Moyers said, I'm sorry, Joseph Campbell said, I don't think we will have one until we have a planetary myth, a myth for the whole planet, a myth that embraces the new discoveries that we've made about where we are in the universe. And by mentioning that, he tips his hat toward a kind of global community,
Mm,
as opposed to national borders and, the traditional political, geopolitical boundaries that we're all so used to.
yeah.
But these questions come up for me when we talk about art in relationship to society, because lately I think that what you're talking about, the integral relationship of storytelling, I believe, is fundamental to the development of a human being, to the development of a young human being, and to an understanding of where we fit in the universe, but in a deep personal way. Like, who am I? How do I fit? And what the am I doing here? Like, what am I
Yeah.
do? What am I doing here? You know. And society tries to answer those questions and gives us all kinds of distractions, so that we need not necessarily face the dread of the question, what the fuck am I doing here?
Yeah.
And what is this little blue ball in the middle of an unfathomable amount of space? What is this? And I think art has always been an attempt to sort of help the individual confront some of that stuff. But lately, I feel as if in a society that's essentially built around not valuing an individual's personal capacity to confront those questions, but in fact to sort of distract oneself from those questions. As an artist, I feel like I am a bit of a rebel in the sense that I'm anxious to bring, or to offer the advantage of bringing people back to a place where they can take a breath and answer for themselves where they think they are. And that's sort of it's a twofold answer, I think. On a personal
Yeah.
note, I like being the rebel. I think that artists are rebels now, particularly now in the United States. Always, they have been to some extent. I think of Solzhenitsyn, and I think of Václav Havel, and all of the artists who, at the time of political upheaval, were cast out, were and or worse. Um, but I think we're in one of those times, and I feel like, although it wouldn't be the church excommunicating us, it feels to me like it's society that is on a tear in a direction that as an individual, I'm not so sure about. So my art, at least recently, has been about, hey, hey, hey,
Yeah.
you know, like you said at the beginning of the interview, you don't know that. you
Yeah. Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
like where are the questions coming from?
Yeah.
And the fundamentals that we always, not that we have to spend our lives like gazing into the mystery, but to, but the opposite would be to spend our lives um, running, getting around or above or somehow escaping or continuing to be distracted from the mystery, and not being able to take advantage of the power that I think an individual derives from finding that center, from finding that place of completeness within oneself, and then through that completeness to be able to say, okay, but where the fuck am I and what the fuck is this about?
Yeah. Yeah.
you
Um,
know
so
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 that's
with
that's a long answer, but
No, I
it's
appreciate it. It really makes a lot of sense because it's a deep subject. With that said, do you see yourself as an artist, a crafts person, both, neither, something else altogether? I know artist can sometimes have this like uh icky quality to it, like, oh, I'm an artist, or I'm a, my scarf is blowing in the wind as I walk with my latte down Fifth Avenue or something like that. But
hmm
um because
yeah.
yeah, sorry, go ahead. I just find that interesting because I think there's something in the thing that we identify with, and that can always change. There's times where I wouldn't refer to myself as an artist because I thought, what kind of pretentious bullshit is that? But then there's another time where I'm like, well, yeah, that's the mountaintop. Like, why wouldn't I want to? So
Yeah.
I guess I'll turn that
Well,
over to you.
yeah, I'll use the question to continue on the thread that I was on before, because I think the idea that calling yourself an artist is pretentious is coming from the very construct, the sociological construct that I was just talking about before. That
Hmm.
idea that expressing yourself or wanting to create or wanting to make something or wanting to be a rebel of perspective, is somehow pretentious. Like, get in line, bro. It's what I hear when I hear you as a young, brilliant, hardworking guy trying, still sort of understanding that to be somewhat pretentious. But I actually don't think so. Not in its heart. I mean, obviously, the trappings of being, a bohemian can be exploited in ways that are inauthentic, and have to do with a person's insecurity and therefore wanting to sort of put on an air, right? But
Hmm.
that has nothing to do with artistry, right? And so I'm actually protective of the word artist these days, particularly, and although I'm hesitant um, to call myself one, because I'm shy about the things I've not accomplished in my life. In my heart, I think the rebel in my heart is maybe the one thing that might partially qualify me to call myself one, or having spent the last 45 years trying. That I think is a qualification too. So I call myself an artist, and I actually, particularly now in my time in my society, that word means more and more to me, both in terms of myself as an individual and in terms of the people that I like to be with.
Yeah.
The Lovely Dark it was written by a bunch of writers that I actually, whose work as part of the Labyrinth or in the close circles of Labyrinth saved my life at one point. And what I mean by that is that the platform of questioning, the platform of being willing to move into the dark and look around and not think of that, and not deny it, but to integrate it. And it goes all the way down to Jung and the shadow, and all of these things about the dark and light. And if you think, and Western civilization is largely built on the ambition of, like, creating a life of light, and having effectively put the darkness into the vault,
What's your
right?
brand,
So that we could,
Charles? You know?
like, and I'm like, that doesn't work,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
so I feel like as an artist, if my job in a time where where so many people are hypnotized, and I have been hypnotized too. I watch Netflix all the time, and I love that kind of stuff, and I get distracted by my phone, and I'm not better than any other guy.
I've endlessly scrolled through social media and been there and thought,
Yeah, me too,
"Oh,
me too,
so and
me too.
so on day 1 is knocking it out of the park, and here I am scrapping together pennies to do my laundry," like so I get it. It's like it can be this cycle.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So so the craftsman part of the question of Frim, I think, is to me self-evident that I'm thinking about Ron Cephas Jones, who passed away just a few days ago. May
Rest
he
in peace.
rest in peace. May he rest in peace. And he was well loved at Labyrinth Theater Company among many other small, large and small groups of people, and certainly the audience of his recent success. But when I think about craftsmanship, I think about the hard work and the diligence that someone like Ron Cephas Jones brings to the table when you give him a script. you know,
Yeah.
so so yes, craftsmanship to me comes as a corollary to anyone who's trying to do art. It's just so much fluffy romance if you're not talking about putting on the boots and putting your ass in the chair,
I jokingly tell my, fiance when we're watching shows, I'm like, "Oh, watch this face acting right here."
yeah.
All that type of stuff, and I'm just like, "Oh, come
Yeah,
on,
yeah.
man."
I know. I
So,
get
yeah.
worried. I get worried as an acting teacher and as a theater person. I get worried that the standard for quote unquote acceptable acting is sort of dropping. Like, I watch some of that. Some of the acting on television is absolutely extraordinarily good, right? But a lot of it is not,
Yeah.
right? And a lot of it is not in shows that actually do well. And I think to myself, I wonder if, like, I feel like I'm that old crotchety guy sitting in his basement listening to old jazz records, you know, who has a really strong opinion about the
Yeah,
new
yeah.
music,
Mhm.
and I'm holding on to some old standard about truth, or
Yeah, yeah. I find myself doing
when
that too. Like, immediately as I said that to you, I was like, "Yeah, someone's gonna pull up some footage of me on something going making some, like, crappy face, like, they, use a take that I was like, 'That's the worst possible take. Why'd you guys use that?'"
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, yeah.
but
But to tie it off as far as being a guest and answering your question, I artistry and craftsmanship. You can't talk about one without the other, and I actually think it goes both ways. Because if a craftsman is making a chair, um, you know, uh, or and that chair is the diligence and the work and the discipline of that of her years of work, and that chair sits on a porch and it's well balanced and people like sitting in it, you know, nobody would begrudge her calling herself an artist, right?
yeah,
So I feel they go hand in hand for me. It doesn't have to be acrylics on canvas, or Shakespeare, or Eugene O'Neill, or Mozart to be, or to be art. You know.
yeah. Well, I wanna say thanks for, talking about that little shame part, because I think the grit that is required for one to put in the time and acquire the skills, like something like the lovely dark is this culmination of all those skills that you've acquired, and it's this really beautiful expression of all the teaching, all the directing, all the acting, and that can only come with time. And I think that's a message that's a little bit missing in the narrative of what it is to be an artist or an actor or fill in the blank. It's the time. You have to put it in. Like, we're in an instant gratification kind of world. It just doesn't happen like that. So I think we have to reconnect to that. So I wanted to say thank you for that and having the grit to make it happen and push through, in a
Yeah, well,
quality way.
thank you. I think it's a battle to sit with oneself and try to make the work. I was rolling my eyes last night at the phrase "the work" because
Hmm.
we talk about that so often, and I get tired of it, and I think that can get a little precious. But the discipline of sitting down in a quiet place and putting in the time. Um, I would say there's no escape from it. There's no way around it. If a young person, a young artist, or a young actor, or painter, or musician, is interested in that kind of, uh, I think, in that kind of um, excellence. There's there's no escape. And if that's part of the message of what you're about, what these interviews are about, I'm a 100% proponent of trying to encourage people to find the strength and the courage to be able to sit with themselves like that. And I don't mean sitting alone necessarily. I mean going to class every day, or working out every day, or going to the dojo every day, or whatever it is that the commitment is. Yeah. And there's a lot of humility, and frankly, for me, there has been a lot of terror in trying to, and I don't always succeed as often as I'd like, because it's very frightening to sit down after having just scrolled through Instagram and seen how many people seem to be just sort of like, knocking off the next show or the next film as if it's a recipe for a lemon tart,
Yeah, yeah.
you know, and then to turn that off and to sit down and try to struggle with the fact that I have never launched a marketing campaign for an audiobook before, and I don't have any way of knowing how to do that. And even if I do it really well, it's still just an audiobook. It's not a it's not a film or something fancy. And these thoughts, I think, are my version of the kinds of thoughts that can keep me from having the discipline that only my brain, my intellect understands that that's necessary, and sometimes even it fails to keep me in the chair.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, no, it's all wound up together for me.
I want to quickly ask, what initially inspired you to pursue a career in the arts? Was there a specific moment? I know you started young, but was there something like the bug that bit you, or kind of an experience that started you off?
I was an awkward kid. Didn't have very good social skills as a kid when I was in like middle school, grade school, and middle school. I hadn't grown up in a way that helped me to have intimate bonds with other kids. I was kind of a loner,
Hmm.
and shy, and um, and then I found expression through acting, and it gave me a chance to fit in and to belong and to learn about the lives of other people, uh, through the writers and through what they had written and through the characters that they had written. I was learning about the lives of other people, and all of it was really fascinating to me. And the energy of being on stage and the affirmation, and the reception of that felt really great. So I would love to be able to tell a story about like how I had a vision of myself as an important artist when I was 11 years old, you know.
Current
But
Charles kneeling next to the child version of
yeah,
Charles.
I did a production of Tom Sawyer. My first professional acting job, I was 11 years old. It was a professional children's theater in Ohio, and I was at home in a way that I had never been before. The rehearsals, the process of trying to get it done right, of the fear of it, the belonging of me and the cast, the whole process. And then for an 11-year-old, the check was
What?
like, I don't know, it's like, maybe it was like $179 a week or whatever the fuck I was making,
You were a millionaire.
it was an unfathomable amount of money.
Yeah. Um, so, how do you navigate the practical aspects of life with your creative pursuits? Is there such thing as a work-life balance?
Yeah, I think that I would say that if I were speaking to someone who was wondering about that, there are countless books and people and resources that will tell you about work-life balance and artistry and how an artist needs to refuel herself and go to the beach, or put in, get up at 5 and do 3 hours of writing in the morning. There's a galaxy of information about what that means.
Hmm.
Um, but I would bring it back, I think, to the my personal experience, which is that my balance is a very idiosyncratic, individual, sometimes odd and awkward mix of the different pieces of advice or the lessons that I've learned over time. It's a very individual thing. Um, but that said, the ideas of staying rejuvenated by virtue of loving somebody, climbing a mountain, or having another practice in addition to your art. Like, I know a friend, you are a accomplished martial artist. And for me, knowing you as I do, your accomplishment in that realm has always gone hand in hand with my impression of you as someone who has the power to make a commitment and be dedicated in it, and therefore to be able to bring that to the art form of acting and the other areas that you are working in, because I just automatically make that connection with you. And when I think about work-life balance, your commitment to the martial arts and the other activities that you're involved in is not a liability. It doesn't take time away from your artistry, right? It supports your artistry and it gives you a muscle that I think is way, way above average in terms of being able to commit yourself and put in the time. And so and then my version of that, I think, is I have um, areas of my life that I know I have to spend time in, or else I won't be able to have the energy
Mm.
to direct or write or produce another project. Um, the gym is one, and although I've been thinking a lot lately about uh, about having a partner and someone to share with. I've been single for since the late '70s. No, I'm kidding. For a very long time, and I got hurt about, I don't know, 12 years ago, and so I kind of shut down in an area of my life, and I leaned into teaching and directing, and I had a consulting job for a while that was very lucrative, and I was able to express myself through that project in various ways, producing projects, but I have realized, oh, I actually have made the error in my own life of leaning into the work as a way to not have to take the risk of being heartbroken again. And I mean that not only in the romantic sense, but in the big life sense. And I think what
Yeah.
I'm saying is, be vulnerable, not only in the art, but in your friendships and with your family and in your day-to-day life. Practice being open and authentic, and put yourself in situations that are outside of your comfort zone that help you to exercise the muscle of being honest and authentic. Maggie Flanagan used to tell us, you can't walk around the street you know, in New York, being vulnerable, you know. but and so that maybe even is another way of saying, and therefore you must find ways in your life, to try to keep your heart open, whether it's romantically or artistically or socially, or you have a hobby or something that really, really like summons your passion, to keep yourself open. I would say is one incredibly important piece of what I think of when I think of balancing art and work and life.
Mm.
That element, I would say, and whatever helps you to do that, I would say is crucial to your artistry, to your ability to come back to the canvas.
Beautiful. Thank you. What strategies do you use to overcome creative blocks or periods of low inspiration?
I think there are, I think that my limited wisdom around this issue involves a couple of discrete pieces. One is the continuing attempt to sit down with the work, regardless of what the mood you're in, the psychology that's around you at the moment, how you're feeling. All of these things are going to be like weather. The storm is going to
Mhm.
come, the storm is going to go, the sun is going to shine. And to be able to sit down with your project or with your current effort, um, in a way that's not dependent upon the weather,
Yeah, I like that a
I
lot.
I think is really, really important.
That's great.
Um, yeah, yeah. So that for me has been one way uh, to do that. I'm reminded of the books of Stephen Pressfield, the
Yeah.
screenwriter who has written books, one of which is called the War of Art, right?
Fantastic book. Yeah.
And this idea of resistance,
Hmm.
yeah, that he talks about. And there's a very there's a very uh, muscular and um, energetic imploring that he does to his reader to let go a little bit of these sometimes romantic mythological ideas of I have a block, or I'm in a low period, or you know and to understand
Because if you
that won't be.
mythologize it, you're somehow giving it power. You're making manifesting it into this creature that's not really. It might not actually be.
Well, I think that, yeah, and not to delegitimize the reality of someone can wake up one day and be like, "Fuck it," I can't, you know.
Yeah.
But because that's real. But
Yeah.
then if that person says, "Fuck it, I can't," and then if the next thought is, "Oh, this must be one of those times," you know.
Where I'm in a noir film, smoking a cigar in a jazz bar.
And I've been there.
Yeah.
Listen,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I've been
The
at the
train
end
on
of the bar
36th,
by like.
34th Street is passing me by.
Right. So maybe it comes with age a little bit, like let go of the stories that you tell yourself about where you are as an artist, and continue to try to find the humble discipline of sitting down and continuing.
Mm,
You know,
yes.
that's something that I take that from musicians a lot. When um, I was teaching at a conservatory, and the acting studios were interwoven in the hallways with the practice rooms for the musicians, you know. And my young acting students would sort of wander in, and kind of like be joking and laughing, and by the time, way before we were even in there, the 19-year-old clarinet player was alone by herself in one of those rooms and had obviously been practicing already for an hour and a half. So I used to point to the musicians for my acting students and say, there is this idea of practice, in certain disciplines that acting doesn't always benefit from in the same way, but it should, right?
Yeah,
So
because you
I
don't
think of,
necessarily look at yourself as the instrument, even though you
yeah,
kind of
and
are.
I think of that too. And like anyone who talks about these things, I should, you know, include the asterisk, the footnote of I don't stand upon the mountain of triumph around these troubling issues, around these difficult, I should say, these difficult issues. I work and struggle with them all the time.
Yeah. So another one on that list, maybe for a bunch of us, how do you handle the financial challenges that often come up with being an artist?
I was laughing with a friend of mine actually on the street the other day. We were walking in the Lower East Side, and we were talking about like, well, so like, what if somebody asked you like, how did you do it? How did you handle this? How did you make this happen? And we were looking at each other, and we started laughing because both of us realized we wouldn't be able to answer the question. Like we have no idea how
Yeah.
this happened. You know, like um, I remember I am not. I have never been a particularly good, financial planner, or, I've never been particularly, I leaned into the idea that if I put my nose to the grindstone and continue to be dedicated and do my work and actually I'm more of an emotional creature, so I think I should use the word devoted,
Yeah.
as much as dedicated.
Yeah.
It's like if I just stay devoted, right, to the work, eventually I will make it. I will be able to, I don't have to worry about putting together a detailed budget for myself because eventually I'll have enough money that that won't matter.
Yeah.
And that was just a way of not dealing with the reality of money, right? Which I never learned how to do. Um, so there's two answers. One answer is for me is I wish somebody, when I was at the High School for Performing Arts, which at the time was basically in Times Square, if between dance classes and acting classes, we had a budget class, you know, um, the fundamental skills of handling your money, I would have thought that was ridiculous at the time because, our heads were elsewhere,
Oh, yeah.
right?
In the
Um,
utopian
but
clouds
I
of
would sure
artistry.
That's right. That's right. But I would surely have been grateful now to have had some progression throughout my education to have been better at that. The other thing I'll say is, you know, that's whatever you need to feel secure enough to be able to do the work. I got to a place in my life where I was so financially insecure that I couldn't really bring my talent to an audition or to a project in a reliable way because the floor was so flimsy beneath me. I didn't feel safe in the world. I had to push out of my mind the fact that I didn't have next month's rent in order to go to an EPA,
You're going there like Oliver
right?
Twist with a bowl out, hoping for.
That's right. Yeah, and you don't want to be in that position.
Yeah.
You just, but each of us has a different tolerance level for that. Like I had to, it took me a long time to learn I was a slow learner in a lot of these areas. And so I now know, at my age, I understand that if I'm financially at risk, I can't create.
Mm.
Other people can take all the money they have in the world and borrow more on credit cards and produce a film, right? While they sleep on people's couches. I can't do that. And sometimes I have actually thought to myself, wow, if I were a real artist, if my heart were really dedicated to the work and to the process of creating beauty, I would sell everything I own, and I would be willing to lie to sleep on people's couches, and I would spend the money, everything I have, on making my first project, and I think about the fact that I have never been that guy. And I kind of thought maybe I was, or I had been taught that maybe I should be that guy. So for me personally, the balance is I have to at least feel as if I know that I have a couple months rent in the bank, and that maybe I have insurance, whatever I need to feel like, okay, now I can go into that rehearsal room and put my attention where it belongs, you know.
Yeah.
But I think it's really individual. I think that
Not
the
everybody
advice
could
that I
be.
would,
Not everybody could be or should be the couch guy. You know,
no, no. And if you're the couch guy, power to you, man.
I've been
You
the
know,
couch
I
guy.
think it's great.
Couch guy and peanut butter. That was like
I
getting
think that's
by.
great. I think that's great. No, I think that's great, and I think that I don't judge it at all. And I used to judge myself for not being that guy. So but even though I've talked about it being a personal and individual thing, highly personal, the one piece of advice that I would offer, I think, is to say, find your personal answer to that. Be honest with yourself about what's causing you. Just is it causing you distraction when you're trying to do the work? Are you distracted? Are you overly tense or anxious about the fact that you don't have enough money? um, do you need to feel safer? Do you need to have at least know that you've got 3 months in the bank, or do you need to start saving money to feel as if that you've got, that you're going to be okay? These things are not. Sometimes the education of an artist involves being taught that, like, a plan B, can be a problem. Like, don't have a plan B. But a plan B is like a bungee cord. Like, so if you're going to jump off the bridge, have a bungee cord. I feel like, and that's not to say it's either or. It doesn't have to be either or, but
Yeah,
know your know your own tolerance for that
yeah. I
stuff,
think
right?
it can be. The main goal is like the bullet point, and then underneath is the thing that supports that. It doesn't have to be considered A and B. It's just like, hey, I do this job because it affords me headshots. It affords me acting classes. It affords me, like, I know that this is going to lead to this. So it's not
Yeah,
necessarily an A and B, which I think has been kind of this binary
yeah,
thinking around it for so long.
yeah. There's one of the associate producers on The Lovely Dark has taught me so much about the practicality of having a job.
Yeah.
I'm on the end of a, I'm coming, I'm at the end of a consulting contract that has also included being able to produce projects. And for my personal salary, the money was sufficient to allow me to feel as if I was okay. Um, that's coming to an end. And so now I'm in a situation where I'm wondering about how I'm going to make a living. And my producer friend at the Lovely Dark was saying, well, get a job. And I only point that out by way of saying that however your listeners want to judge it or think of it, when she said that, I realized she was in the soul, in my makeup. She was opening the portal to a dark opera about identity, right? About identity as a man, status, success, ego. Maybe my girlfriend would have stuck with me if I had been more of a success. What are you talking? Get a job, you know. And I
Cracks open all
realized,
these things.
yeah, and I've had jobs. I was a waiter for 13 years. I was a temp for 13 more, whatever. But she unknowingly, in my artist chest, she was cracking open, a bottomless pit of of existential uh, doubt
Yeah.
about belonging and about being loved and about artistry and all of it. But she is an accomplished person, and she meant it in a way that was not in exclusion of the work that I was trying to accomplish, right? Or that it's a daunting step down, Charles, for you. I'm sure
Yeah.
it's going
Yeah.
it's going to be very hard on your, she wasn't saying it in that spirit at all. She was just like, if you want to shore up your finances in a way that's going to help you to continue working, and you're anxious about it, you know, find some work.
Yeah, I think
And
that's
and
such an important conversation to have because most people, excuse me, it becomes a thing about like branding or, how are you perceived by these? And that's always bothered me because it felt like very false. I work a full-time overnight security gig.
yeah, yeah,
I still audition for projects. I will run off to Brooklyn and New York and shoot a scene with an Oscar award winning actress, run back to Buffalo, and get back to work. It's just like it
yeah.
is what I have to do. And for a long time, I think in the maybe younger years of my pursuing of it, I was like, well, you can't do that because then how are you perceived? Or are you, you get better at what you do. So if I'm doing something else that isn't acting, I'm not getting better at it. And it's like BS because you're in life. So you're getting better at life and hopefully that's going to make you better at the craft and development of what you do. So I think that's an important conversation to have about that work. So thank you for bringing that up because I think that's actually really important.
It goes back to the original question that we were talking about with the center of the individual, finding their own center and understanding themselves and what they need, because the job part, the money part, fits into the deeper psychology of knowing yourself first, and and liking yourself and treating yourself as you would a dear friend, and having evolved to a place where you're able to do that. And then your decisions about money come from you, as opposed to questions about status or about, how is this going to look?
Yep. I'm going to jump ahead a little bit. What impact does your personal environment or workspace have on your creative output? Do you function I think this is not the answer, but you probably don't function best in like a tornado. I imagine you like to like have things like this is where the spoon goes. This is where, or maybe I'm wrong. I don't know. And maybe from the directing aspect, like you have a more of a vision. But I don't know. What do you?
You can say it. I'm a control freak and I'm
No, no,
compulsive. Go
no.
ahead.
Because I would fancy myself. I would love to have like Patrick Bateman's apartment from American Psycho, but I don't think that's feasible. It's beautiful,
Yeah, yeah,
minimalist,
yeah,
but I have
yeah,
too
yeah,
much
yeah,
stuff.
yeah. I'll tell you. It's interesting. When I when I was in, I mean, I'll go ahead and say it. When I was in recovery from the loss of a relationship, and I had recently stopped drinking, I moved out of New York, and I everything in my life was immaculately under control. My students would take a ride to class with me or whatever in my car, and the car was like 15 years old, and they would climb into the car and they'd be like, "Yo, is this new? Is this car new?" Like, because it was it was so fucking clean. And I battened down the hatches of my life in order to cope, in order to get by, in order to feel as if I was in control. So my environment was an expression of the need to not be hurt, to be in control of my environment. And I was, and everything was immaculately, as you say, every spoon was where it belonged, right?
But did that help your
Later,
process?
actually, no, no.
Okay.
But so for me personally, I had to learn that being organized and being like neat, and being like clean and having the right couch was not something that was coming from my center of this is what I need to feel good about my life. It was reactionary. It was an attempt to uh, feel as if I had a grip on my environment, as if I was in control of my life. And that was legitimate at the time because I needed that period to feel as if, okay, wait a minute, you know, I gotta plug the holes in my boat. I gotta put new tar in the bottom of the boat. I gotta scrape off the barnacles. So that was important for me, but it helped me to understand that neatness and being in control of my environment like that was not coming from whether or not I was supporting my creativity. Um, but the answer is absolutely yes. I'm about to probably move, actually, because my current residence, I think, was procured from a place of it was the last little thread of trying to come back around to healing.
Mm.
So I found a place in the old neighborhood, and I sort of a reclaiming and a cleansing for myself, but it was personal. It wasn't about how can I use what I know about myself, to make well, that's where I am now. How can I use what I know about myself to make the next decision that's not an unconscious reaction to what I think my life should look like, but is actually an authentic expression of what I want my life to look like and what I want to make and what I want to build and what makes me feel comfortable and good. And I haven't been particularly good about that actually over the years. I've been trying to make my life look like I thought it was supposed to look in order to be able to
Yeah.
have the things that I thought I was doing. Right. Um, so, but intellectually, I think the answer is it goes back for me to the same thing. If you have taken time, to understand, to learn how to value yourself in the world, regardless of what other people think, regardless of your status or your success, whether you're Christopher Nolan or you're working as a host of a bar on the Upper West Side and you've just made your first short film. It doesn't matter. What matters is, how on your journey are you learning who you are? And if you find that first, or at least continuing to try to look for it, you make these decisions based on that center as opposed to this is what it should look like. So, the bohemian loft, down in Chinatown is just as much bullshit as the fancy apartment on the Upper West Side if it's not really what you're about. Right. So if you
Yeah.
think by making the loft, you're going to turn yourself into a creative bohemian, you're sadly mistaken. Right. So the decision about money and about your environment, I think, again, comes from have you taken the time to be able to hear your own voice,
Wow.
really hear your own voice, and to value your own voice over the din of all of those harpies that are all too glad to replace the hole in you with their message about what it should look like.
I'm going to combine the next two questions because we're kind of in that vein and I'm curious. So, how do you approach self care? Is it mental, physical, spiritual? Uh, all three, some variation. I know you mentioned the gym earlier. Um, and then how do you deal with failures, mistakes, regrets? I know it's a lot. It's a big question, but I figure if it's like a subject of self care and then kind of dealing, because you're talking a little bit about dealing with those things, those um, elements of the past, or I mean, we can even talk about like, let's say failures or mistakes, like along the way you're doing the lovely dark, and you're like, ah, shoot, we could have done that moment better, or whatever. Like, how do you deal
Yeah.
with that?
Well, I think trying to integrate the question in my head and come up with a way to embrace the elements of your question, but I think I'll just let go of that a little bit and see if I can address the pieces. Um, in terms of the failures, and when you get to be, when you get to be a middle-aged guy like me, failures are a part of the story, right? Um, and the fear of failure, I think, is much, much more of a demon than the failures themselves.
Hmm.
Um, I think the fear of failing again, or the fear of not doing something that's excellent, or that is really the problem. I think failures, if you understand what it means to do something that's difficult, and you have some modicum of humility around the fact that you're engaging in something that's really difficult, you know, then allow yourself to understand that failure is going to happen. Um, and, you know, And remember, like great artists look at the stuff they did early on and they're like, ah, you know. and,
Hmm.
and other people are thinking, oh my God, it's incredible, it's a masterpiece. And the artists are like, I could have done, you know. So the idea of failure is very subjective also in terms of like the value of something, are you what's the metric? Financial, how many people click like,
Yeah.
what's the metric for failure? But I would say the way I deal with failure in terms of the instructive part that might help or fit in with what we're doing here and what we're trying to offer here, or what I think you're doing. Um, Failure is going to come, and failure is going to come, and it will come again, and it's how you get better. Yeah. And if the fear of failing is stopping you out of an ego thing, or you're identifying with the art in a way that's not healthy, like, this is me, man, I'm on the line here, then you're not going to really be able to progress in a way that's going to turn you into a craftsman, a professional, someone who can really do the work on a reliable and regular basis, because you're going to have attached too much ego, too much fear around what happens if it's not the Sistine Chapel,
Yeah.
you know. Um, and and so that would be my answer about failure. It will come, and don't let the fact that it will come slow you down. Fail, you
Fail
know,
away. Yeah.
fail, um, fail away, fail away. That's right. That's right.
So
And that's easy to
converse.
say. It's easy to say and difficult to do, but that's still the advice, nonetheless.
So then on the opposite end of the coin, how do you celebrate victories, accomplishments, good ideas?
Yeah. Well, that goes back to self-care, because I have never been particularly good at that part. Like I remember I was doing Chris, the role of Chris in All My Sons, at the Performing Arts Center at Cornell University. And I had enlisted the help of Philip Seymour Hoffman, who I had known by that time I had known for 10 years. This was like 2006. So I had known him already for 10 years, and we were friends, and he was a member of Labyrinth Theater Company, obviously. And so I asked him for help on the role of Chris, and so I'll never forget sitting late night in the offices of that university, emailing, getting emails from Phil about, like, approaching this role. It was one of the great memories for me as an actor, and at one point, later on in the process of corresponding with him a little bit, he said, Charles, just want to say, this is getting to play this part. This is the definition. This is success. And we hadn't been in a conversation about what is success, what is failure, or gosh, Phil, I wish I could succeed like you, or we hadn't had that conversation as part of him helping me with this role. And he had the instinct to sort of just unsolicited to share that remark with me. And it made me realize that Phil knows. It moves me because it's like Phil knows about me, that I have been longing to be able to point to some trophy or to some success or to some piece of wisdom, not of wisdom, but some piece of affirmation, around my work, that I'm hungry for that feeling, you know. And so he knew that about me. So he took it upon himself to point out to me that me working on that part was success. And just the fact that Philip Seymour Hoffman had recognized in me that I'm not very good at recognizing these moments, like I need to appreciate like where I am, that really helped me understand that I'm not particularly good about recognizing success. I really don't. And yeah, and so I'm proud of The Lovely Dark. I'm proud of the screenplay Grace, the short film for which I'm trying to raise money. Um, and I'm proud of that. But in the world of a person for whom, you will never be enough. Like if you're in that world, if you're in that psychology world, success is a siren that will lure you into the deep water, and it will not help you. you know
Mhm.
um if But it's a great question, and the simpler, less bombastic answer is fucking celebrate. Because if the lack of celebration is in proportion to how much you devalue yourself. If you don't celebrate, it's just you're just saying to yourself, well, because I did it, it's not really all that. It's not all that.
Yeah.
um, but that's dangerous, right? Because then that keeps you from being able to feel strong enough to take the next risk.
What motivates you to keep going, to continue walking on the path?
I think the God, that's a hard one. These are complicated. These are deep questions, a friend.
I've sat up
Um,
many a night, thinking about it. I mean, you there was a really, if it helps at all, there's a really beautiful exercise that you brought up once in during the Meisner kind of conservatory classes that we were doing some years back, and it was like a daydreaming exercise about, like, what would you basically like crawl through cut glass from here to there, whatever the distance was to get. And I remember that hitting me. I'm like, oh my God. Like, oof. Like, it gets you right in the chest,
yeah,
because you're like, well, and then that makes you think, well,
yeah,
why am I doing this? And
yeah,
then you start
yeah.
to
I
really come
think,
upon some of those answers. And I understand that it can hit hard. So I won't press too
yeah,
much, but if there's something that you could share from it, it would.
of course, I'll try. Of course. Uh, it would be weird to agree to be on your podcast and then be like, I'm sorry, I will not answer that.
I could always edit it out. The magic of editing.
um,
Cross dissolve into the next
yeah,
question.
that what you're mentioning is first year exercise when you're learning when an acting student is getting familiar with what it is that turns them on, really turns them on, what it is that summons the deepest passions, the deepest desires, what would they crawl over cut glass to get, right? Because a young actor needs to know on a very personal, idiosyncratic level, what gets me going, right? Um, and I think there is an analogy, there is a parallel there to extrapolate from that into a larger place of like what keeps me going. Like what allows me to keep going. For me, I think it goes back to what we were saying before about questioning, the questioning the matrix, the constructs of my society, my culture, um, and a sense of belonging. I I belong with people who turn over the rocks of where we are and what we're doing here, and want to see the squiggly things under that once they do, um, and talk about them and examine them and look at them. I think I belong in that world personally, in terms of what I'm up to, like how I'm spending my time. If I'm helping to illuminate something about the human condition, and that encourages people, inspires people, gives them strength, or even just a sense of, oh, that's happening to them too. Whatever it may be. If I'm involved in activities that allow me to participate in that overall uh, goal, then I'm at home. So for me, the arts are that place for me, and so that's me wanting to be at home in that community and in that effort and in the work itself. I belong there. Um, I've What keeps me going. in the, I think I've had good fortune to this point of being able to continue to make the projects and pay the rent, right? Um, and so far, I've been able to do that. And maybe, you know what? Maybe if nothing else, when I die, the trajectory of what I accomplished will simply be that I stuck in there, and was able to continue to be spending the lion's share of my time in the arts, for into my 70s or 80s. Maybe that will be my achievement, as opposed to being on Saturday Night Live or being, but when I think about the idea of persistence or perseverance and patience, you know, um, some of the people who talk about that stuff cut and run when things get really hard. I've had a recent example of that, actually. Um, but 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 not being very articulate here. I'm sorry. I'm
No,
trying
it's
to
okay.
find. I think I'm just
I
trying to.
understand that too. I think the marathon nature of the work, the grit required. I think there's um, excuse me, the coffee is getting to me, but yeah, there's something very. And if somebody does cut and run, I think in the past it'd be like, oh, you fucking gave up, you know, you gave up. But I think for some people, the path, whatever it may be, is something that they may leave, they may come back, but life provides so many challenges that I think in the past I would kind of be maybe a little bit of a jerk towards people like that. But then you realize, like, hey, sometimes you got to step off. There's other. I don't know. I think I'm a little. I get where
Yeah,
you're coming from. Like it's a long path, and it requires a lot
yeah,
of patience and grit and determination. And like you're a marathon athlete. If you, I mean, it
yeah,
goes into one of the other questions, which
yeah,
is how do you envision your artistic journey evolving in the future? So I think
yeah,
kind of tying it in, like you're saying you're going into your 80s, and that provides like this beautiful, in my opinion, it provides this beautiful example of like I think it's more important to be rooted in the arts in some way than to um, have a lotto mentality about it. You're not always going to be able to
well,
hit.
yeah. I mean, that's what Phil was saying when he wrote to me and said, Charles, doing this role right now, this is success, right? It's there no the idea of the plateau, the idea of, okay, I've made it. Um, I think young people are probably, um, well. I think they're well advised to be careful about the imagery that our culture presents, to them as being like, this is what it means. If you're worthwhile, this is what it will look like. That's a dangerous thing, and I think it can, in the arts, for us as young actors, and it can create a picture for us of what it will look like if our hard work pays off, right? But Phil's point when he wrote me that note was, getting to do this work is the payoff, right? And that sounds a little bit like, oh yeah, yeah, but in the long arc of things that you're talking about, I think that's the only orientation ultimately that you can have that will allow you not to go slowly and darkly crazy.
Yeah. It's actually interesting because you answered like three questions back to back there, so that worked out perfectly. One thing I will ask though is, do you have any daily habits or rituals, and if so, what are they?
Uh, yeah. That going back to that finding of the center, of getting in touch with the center, I have um, trying to stay present in the moment that I'm in um, is something that I find great value in. That I'm not a Buddha. I don't. I'm not even a black belt. I don't have an extraordinary skill at being able to stay present in the moment, but I do have at this point a set of guardrails that are well enough formed now that if I stop paying attention to where I am and what I'm doing at the moment, little alarms will go off.
You won't roll into the
So
gutter.
I I won't roll into the gutter. That's right.
Yeah.
The ball will hit some
Yeah.
pin.
Yeah.
Some pin will go down. Right. That's right. That's right. And so I value the habit of being here now. Um, and I've read. I would recommend, in the spirit of everything we've talked about. There's a book called "The Way of Integrity" by Martha Beck. There's a book called The Mountain Is You. I think it's by Brianna Weinstein, but The Mountain Is You is the name of the book. And my work over the last 6 years has afforded me the opportunity to dig deeply into these habits for yourself and ways of looking at the world. But the practice of staying right where you are right now, I would say, even if it's aspirational, yeah. I would definitely say for me personally, that has been a lifesaver. Much as those writers were for me, or the experience of being in the environment of writing and of people who were explorers by nature saved my life. Um, you know, uh, dozen years ago. So too, the idea of being present here in the moment, one day at a time. And other friends of mine will laugh together. We'll say, yeah, like 1 hour at a time. Like, yeah, 1 minute, like 1 minute at a time,
Yeah.
And we're not being facetious. I mean, not always. Sometimes it's playful and we're joking around, but sometimes we fucking mean it. And I find that to be extraordinarily strengthening and helpful when it comes to, staying, having the muscle and being well off, being a sense of well-being enough to stay centered and to continue to do the work. That has been really essential. The other thing I think is a physical regimen that is outside of how I'm feeling. What mood am I in? If you have regimens that are physical or for your body that are contingent upon like how you're feeling that day, it's different than if you have regimens that are regiments.
Yeah. So I've heard it.
Right.
I've heard it listed as excuse me. Um, being principle based versus motivational based, because the motivation is not always going to be there, but if it's the principle of this has to be done at this time this day, typically you'll
Yeah.
get it done.
Yeah,
um
and I think, yeah, that's right. And I think the habit of the gym. I mean, the gym sounds like so quotidian, and unspecial. But it's for me, it's one of the things that is outside the realm of the fact that I'm sad that day, or that
yeah.
I'm feeling lazy that day. I don't. It's like it's just like hygiene. You just do it,
Yeah.
you know. And I feel like those are really important for people. For me, that has been really important for me. Um, and and uh, and writing, journaling. But more than just journaling is the space that you create for yourself, whether it's in the morning or the evening, at some point in your day, a space for yourself in which to sit with yourself and enjoy your own company a little bit,
Yeah.
and touch base again with that part of you, that the center of yourself that you care about, that you like, that you have learned to love, and from which you can make decisions about all the other stuff.
Yeah. I mentioned it in previous episodes, but I started keeping this little just like mini journal in my pocket with a pen, and because I realize I suffer from like decision fatigue. So I gotta like sometimes just put these things down and be like, I can X this off, because if I try to take notes on my phone, I will get distracted, and then all of a sudden I'm like, oh, I forgot to do this thing, blah blah blah, and it just like becomes this, you know,
Well, doing one thing at a
exponential.
time.
Yeah,
Yeah, doing one thing at a time. The mythology of multitasking.
no,
It's like,
no.
no, I think I feel as if I've graduated from it. I mean, maybe that would make me a really bad day trader on the floors of Goldman Sachs. But in terms of my life, where I am right now, this mythology around multitasking does me no favors whatsoever. I look for the strength and the intelligence to do one thing at a time. And I think that's hard sometimes.
Coffee, tea, or something else?
Coffee.
Okay.
Yeah.
And now for the cosmic roll of the dice. So this is a thing that I started doing last couple of episodes, where I roll the dice and there's 20 questions, and the idea of cosmic roll of the dice is basically like, we're such as life. We didn't decide where we wanted to be born, to what family, to any of that stuff. It was just a cosmic roll of the dice. So here we are once again,
Yes.
rolling the
Okay.
dice. All right. Let's see.
Can I buy a vowel?
5, 5, 10, 13. Am I counting correctly? Okay. So 13.
Yes.
Let's see what we got here. Question 13. Can art exist without an audience? Is the act of creating art inherently tied to the act of sharing it with others? I can read that again too.
I got it. I got it. It's reminding me of conversations that I have with my composer for the Lovely Dark, Andre Fratto, who is a philosopher extraordinaire, we dig into these questions together sometimes, like college students. Just and it reminds me of some of the. I can hear his voice in my head. He's answering the question right now, actually. Um,
Please feel free to reach
but
out in the
but
comments and answer it
yeah, yeah.
if you want. You're more than welcome to come on.
um, yeah. Well, yeah, maybe he will, but for right now, he's saying, "Well, why the fuck else would you do it?" No. So I think I would say that right now, right here in our time, the idea of offering in an authentic, unpretentious, and unaffected way the truth of your own doubts and joys and what you think is beautiful, um, and giving, by virtue of you doing that, finding the courage to do that, allowing other people to see you doing that and to understand that you're willing to be an idiosyncratic, neurotic, vulnerable, and you're willing to be judged, and be to express yourself in a way that's not indulgent, but that is contoured by the rigors of your craft, so that other people can feel it and appreciate it and be absorbed into it. Yeah, for me, I can't talk about that process without, talking about who's receiving it. I wouldn't know. I wouldn't know how to do that. I wouldn't know how, that separation to me would seem artificial. I
Charles,
don't. I think it's important.
you're the man. I was just gonna say, like, you're very thoughtful, and like all you're able to consider and actually like come up with uh these answers in a way that's impressive. So I think you've done this before.
Well, I appreciate that. I've thought about it before. I guess I
Yeah.
could say that, And when it comes to trying to say things in a way that are helpful, that taps into the part of me that is a teacher, and so I get a little jazzed about the opportunity to try to frame it in a way that's inspiring, or that at least causes, puts a burr of doubt in someone's hair, and they're like, "Wait a minute, that what do I think about that?" I think, but that's a great question, and I was going to make the distinction about like what I just said is I deeply believe in what I just said, but I also think that if is it artistry if a young woman who is a thoughtful young woman is sitting in her bedroom and writing poetry, and it's beautiful poetry. um, it's like Schrodinger's cat. It's like, well, if it's
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
like, you know is it or isn't it? I don't know. And I think it's a
Well, you
great, is it
also
art or
become the
not,
audience. You
but
become the audience to your own creation, or maybe you're
yeah,
not the creator, so to speak. Maybe you're the vessel for whatever this
yeah,
thing is.
yeah. And maybe
Without
that's a
getting too
question
heavy
that,
into the weeds, you know.
no, it's a question that I would say leave it alone, leave the question alone, because because what you want, how you want to share your work, right, will come. That'll be part of your artistry, right? That'll be part of what it is you're doing. My artist, if I'm building beautiful Appalachian benches and chairs and roll top desks for a community of 39 people, you know, that's fine. Or one person. Or if I'm doing it for myself, I mean, where do you draw that line? But I would say let it go, because it has to do with what the individual is what the person is trying to create in the first place, and what's the goal of it, you know.
The success of playing, of being in a play, or the success of being the villain in Mission Impossible 3. It's like it's kind
Yeah.
of
Yeah,
the
yeah,
success of the
yeah,
success.
yeah. And how many people, yeah, because then if you get into like drawing the line about like, well, how many people saw it, like that's that, I would want for every young person to eventually graduate from the crap around, well, how many people saw it, or what did I, where am I on IMDb? What's my IMDb
Yeah,
score?
yeah, yeah.
These things can matter in terms of getting the next opportunity, right?
Not
Like
for your
that's
soul.
great. That's wonderful if your IMDb score is going up, and that increases the chances that some producer's going to maybe check you out, you know, and maybe you'll end up having an opportunity to do this really cool sci-fi series on Hulu. That's great, but has nothing to do with your understanding of, is what I'm doing art or not, right? Each person is responsible for coming up with an understanding of that, and that's hard. That's humble work, you know. And it may take some people legitimately out, like you were saying before. Like some people, I'm not. I know a woman. There are people I love that when I was a young man made the decision to get out of the arts. And I was, and I had a big ego, and I had gone to fancy schools, and I thought very highly of myself. And I was like, didn't have it, didn't have the chops, cut the cord,
Yeah,
you know.
they
And
hit
now
eject.
I have a complete, yeah, they hit a jack. That's right. That's right. And now I have a completely different perspective on those people, entirely different perspective on those people, who now I think had the wisdom to listen to their voices and to understand their own hearts, and to make a move, that served them well. So I'm doing this. I'm sorry, I'm orbiting around this idea of being able to recognize your own voice in a way that is not beholden to the assumptions of your culture. And God, it's fucking hard. It's just so easy to say it, like that, to articulate it like that. But man,
I
and
think
I
the
don't
more you
know.
hear it,
I don't.
the more you hear it and the more avenues it comes
Yeah,
from, the truer it becomes, because then it doesn't
yeah,
become this esoteric idea that like, oh, some, kooky person said it. And so it's like, how could that possibly be true? But then I think the more you hear certain truths from different avenues, you realize that it's a very universal truth. So I appreciate you kind of circling back to that, because I think it's true. I think everyone has to look at their own journey their own path and really, take that time. Like you said, you got to go through the weather. You can't be a fair weather analyst of your own artistry and career,
Yeah, yeah. Well, it's funny because one of my weaknesses as a teacher early on, one of my weaknesses, I would say, and it got me in a little trouble, not dark trouble, but it caused some unpleasantness, because I wanted me saying it to be able to solve the problem for the student. Like, listen, you've heard it once, right? This is it. You've heard it. Now we're done with that part. Now let's move on, right? And that same impatience, you're catching me a little bit on that, even though I don't do that in the classroom, but that same impatience of wanting it to have been the solution. Like, okay, we framed that well. That's good. Now everyone who's heard this
moving
podcast can
forward.
be over this problem.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah. And here we go. Moving on. Right.
yeah, yeah.
And it doesn't, you're right. You're
We'll never
so
speak
right.
of
You're
this
so right,
again.
Brittany. That's right. I told you that already,
Yeah,
right? Yeah, yeah. No, and I'm so glad you said that because it's so true that it's about offering what you can and sharing the experiences that you can, and that's the spirit of your podcast, which I think is really cool, and also the idea of the my layman's understanding of a dojo is a place where people are committed, not just in terms of the physical part, but there's a spiritual aspect of it, and an existential piece of it, which has to do with orienting yourself in the world.
yeah,
Which actually, some of my conversations with you over the years have helped me understand that. But I think that contribution that you're making, and to know that it's a contribution and that it's a piece of what everyone will hear. And
yeah,
I get fervent about it because I want people to be able to benefit from some of the lessons that I wish that I had learned, earlier in my life would have been so helpful to have learned those a little earlier. Um, and I don't know if in my 20s coming out of NYU, with a fancy new agent, at CAA, if I would have been able to hear what we're talking about, right? But if nothing else, it would certainly be it would pique my interest, about what am I after and why am I after it, right? What are the real priorities that are driving my behavior? Is it stuff that I haven't worked out about the way I was raised? Is it stuff that makes me feel better about myself because there's this hole inside? What's driving my pursuit? Um, and it's not about, you have to answer that question by the time you're 30. But if you're not engaged in the question, then I think you have missed an enormous opportunity to understand what it really means. What one of the important aspects of being an artist, which is to be asking,
yeah,
you know, asking, about yourself in the world and having the courage to do that. And like a shaman, then coming back from the other plane with something to tell about, you know, the darkness or the beauty or what it means to be here. But that's what I would say about giving advice to young people or artists who are at the early part of their career. I would feel confident about offering that piece of advice, right? Stay in a position of questioning, not only about your culture and social mores and where you think we are morally and the advancement of humanity, and all the issues that come under that, like race and politics and getting along, but all the way at the bottom, which is, who do you want to be? and how does that become a spring, a natural spring for your artistry? Keep asking that, and the question itself will give rise to an enormous resource, right, of productivity, even if you never quite answer it. Um, but the humility in that, I think, is something that I could confidently say, look for that, look for that. No.
Charles, thank you so much for your really invaluable uh, wisdom and experience and sharing that. And, maybe somebody will listen to it now, or they'll listen to it at some time in the future, and all the information will help them to move forward in a way that,
Yeah,
us in kind of retrospect can look and say, yeah, these are good points. So thank you. I really appreciate it. I appreciate your time. And everyone listening now, check out The Lovely Dark. All the information's in the show notes. Support Charles's next endeavor, and
please,
hopefully we'll have
please.
you on as a two-time guest in the future.
It's a pleasure, and even when we're not doing it in public, I always have loved being able to speak philosophically with you, a friend. So it's great to be able to do that with you again. It's been a while, so
It has.
I'm grateful and I'm flattered to be invited. So thank you for having me.